Cecil B. DeMille's masterpiece, The Ten Commandments.
Remember when Hollywood built ancient Egypt so convincingly that people still mistake its marketing for history? Well, that was The Ten Commandments, released by Paramount in November of 1956. Directed by Cecil B. DeMille at the age of 73, who climbed Mount Sinai, had a heart attack during production, and still finished the film. Charlton Heston played Moses, a prince who finds out that he's a slave, turns down the throne of Egypt, and follows the burning bush. Yul Brynner played Pharaoh, the most stubborn man in the Old Testament, who goes through 10 plagues, he loses his army, his firstborn son, and still won't say that he was wrong. The film ran nearly 4 hours and never stopped. Today, we're counting down 15 weird facts about the 10 Commandments. The film, that almost starred a cowboy, deleted a plague for laughs, sent its former Jesus to set by ambulance, and accidentally turned a marketing campaign into constitutional law. And stick around for number one, because one prop from 1956 is probably still sitting outside of a courthouse near you. Before we get started, though, hit like and subscribe to remember when. It helps the channel find more people who know "So let it be written, so let it be done" by heart and aren't sure if they learned it from the Bible or a Paramount release. Either way, let the plagues begin. Number 15. Hopalong Cassidy chose a cowboy over Moses. Cecil B. DeMille wanted William Boyd to play Moses, but Boyd's team said no. And the reason given was that Moses would be out of character for him. Boyd was Hopalong Cassidy, and in the early 50s, that wasn't a small thing to walk away from. Over 100 companies were licensing Hopalong Cassidy merchandise. We're talking lunchboxes, roller skates, soap, watches, motor oil, even milk. Boyd personally pocketed around $800,000 in 1950, mostly from licensing. He got 15,000 fan letters a week, and he landed on the cover of Time, Life, and Look. That lunchbox was the first one in history to carry a licensed character. That's a great fun fact for trivia. But anyways, Moses, for him, it'd be out of character. So after Boyd passed on it, DeMille burned through Kirk Douglas, Dan Daly, and a brief look at Rock Hudson before landing on Charlton Heston. Not through some legendary audition, but because a photo of Heston reminded him of Michelangelo's Moses. That was basically it.
That Michelangelo caught so magnificently in marble.
So Boyd retired his character in 1953 and died in 1972. But Heston, meanwhile, fused himself so completely to the role that generations of people picture his face the second someone mentions the Book of Exodus. His face is still selling Easter programming 70 years later. Now, the lunchbox record still stands, and so does this one. A cowboy turned down a burning bush for brand reasons and got replaced by a man who looked like he'd walked off a museum pedestal and could yell at a sea convincingly. Number 14. Audrey Hepburn lost a role over her figure. Fresh off Roman Holiday, Audrey Hepburn was suddenly the most sought-after actress in Hollywood, but DeMille passed on her over her build. The role was Nefretiri, the throne princess so irresistible that Moses turns down an actual kingdom to get away from her, and Pharaoh starts a war rather than sit with the rejection. Columnists were calling it the most sought-after role of the year. Hepburn was already under contract at Paramount. The studio was making the film. This should have just been a phone call. This should have been a slam dunk. But instead, DeMille decided that she was too slim for the Egyptian costumes. In his judgment, they needed more presence than her frame could give them.
But the problem was that her figure was not the classical Egyptian figure.
So he kept looking. Nearly a dozen actresses were considered, Vivian Leigh and Jane Russell among them, before the role landed on Anne Baxter, who'd originally been up for Moses' wife, a far smaller part. Somewhere in an alternate universe, the most decorated actress of her generation is sharing the screen with Charlton Heston as an Egyptian queen. In this one, it didn't happen because of her figure. In 1990, Hepburn accepted the Cecil B. DeMille Award.
It gives me real pleasure to present the Cecil B. DeMille Award to you, Miss Audrey Hepburn.
Hollywood's Lifetime Achievement honor, named after the man who once decided that she wasn't built right for his movie. Number 13. The plague that didn't survive the edit. Now, the Bible gives Egypt 10 plagues. DeMille only put a handful of them on screen, and the one that he actually bothered to film and then threw away was the frogs. He shot the whole sequence, frogs overrunning the palace, Egyptians scrambling out of their own rooms. He screened it and hated it. Instead of divine judgment, it played for laughs. So he cut a real biblical plague out of what was, at the time, the most expensive film ever made. The plague that did survive pulled it off with one of the least biblical effects imaginable. That fiery hail battering Pharaoh's palace, that's not stone. It's popcorn, spray-painted white and then dumped over the set. light enough that it couldn't knock anyone cold, and bouncy enough to pass for the real thing. They even swept it up and reused it between takes. The flames? That came later. Hand-drawn frame by frame. A real biblical plague, cut because the frogs came off funnier than fearsome. Scripture lost the argument. The popcorn stayed. The frogs didn't. Number 12. Yul Brynner couldn't get taller, so he got bigger. Now, Charlton Heston stood at around 6'3". Yul Brynner was closer to 5'8", and the movie needed the two of them to read as equals fighting over the same throne. Height wasn't fixable, so Brynner went in the other direction. He'd be shirtless for most of the film, standing right next to Moses, and he refused to get physically overshadowed. So he threw himself into a brutal weightlifting program and turned Pharaoh into the most jacked man in Egypt. It paid off twice. Around that same stretch, he was reprising his old Broadway role in The King and I. And that build, the one that's always looked a little too gym-heavy on The King of Siam, was leftover muscle from not wanting to lose a stare down with Charlton Heston. Both films landed in theaters in 1956. He bulked up to keep pace with Moses. He walked off with the Best Actor Oscar for the other movie.
The winner is Yul Brynner.
That's a trade that most actors would take in a heartbeat. Number 11, the man who played Jesus showed up on a stretcher. Now, most people know H.B. Warner as Mr. Gower, the grieving druggist who cuffs George Bailey's ear in It's a Wonderful Life. That's a role that people remember him for. Oh, what a heartbreaking role that is. But to Cecil B. DeMille, he was something else entirely. Back in 1927, DeMille had cast Warner as Jesus Christ in his silent film, The King of Kings, the performance that made Warner's career and became one of the most recognized faces in religious cinema. 30 years later, making what he knew might be his last film, DeMille wanted the man who'd played Christ for him standing in the middle of the Exodus. By then, Warner was living in a nursing home. DeMille had an ambulance bring him to the Paramount lot. Warner was carried onto the soundstage on a stretcher, kept on oxygen between setups. He filmed a scene as Aminadab, a frail old slave being carried by the men around him, and was carried right back out the same day. Too weak to manage the scripted lines, so he just said whatever he could, and DeMille let the others improvise around him. It was the last speaking role he ever played. By the end of his career, H.B. Warner had played both the Old and New Testament, and played it wonderfully. Number 10, Moses' robe was historically accurate by total accident. Moses' robe in the back half of the movie, rust, white, and black, that's technically historically accurate, but nobody planned that. The man who did design it, artist Arnold Friberg, picked those colors for one reason. They popped against the Egyptians' pale costumes and read from the back row on Technicolor stock. Just pure contrast. It wasn't until later that the film's own researchers realized that rust, white, and black happened to be the traditional colors of the tribe of Levi, Moses' actual tribe. A wardrobe call made purely for the camera turned out to be archaeologically correct by accident. And that accident only lands because of how seriously DeMille took everything else. His researchers dug through Josephus and a stack of ancient historians and rabbinic texts. The tablets were carved from real Mount Sinai granite. He hired a University of Chicago scholar just to inscribe them in authentic ancient Canaanite. He even climbed Sinai himself. Friberg wasn't even a costumer by trade. He was a Bible history obsessive that DeMille pulled in to get the details right. So after all the scholars and the mountain climbing, one of the movie's most accurate touches was the one that nobody meant to get right. Number 9, the baby in the basket was a real Heston. The infant that drifts down the Nile in the reed basket, that's Charlton Heston's actual son. And DeMille built the shooting schedule around him. While his wife was pregnant, Heston mentioned it to DeMille. And producer Henry Wilcoxon connected the dots on the spot. If it's a boy, why not just cast him as baby Moses? Fraser Clark Heston arrived on February 12, 1955. DeMille timed the whole basket sequence, of course shot in a water tank on Paramount's Nile set, to land exactly when Fraser hit 3 months old, because 3 months is the age that Scripture gives baby Moses when the mother sets him adrift. They actually give Fraser a special motion picture industry award for playing the infant Moses at just 3 months old. That's a trophy that most babies won't have crib space for. He grew up to become a director and eventually directed his father in TV films like Treasure Island. The baby in the basket ended up calling the shots. Most fathers hope that their kids follow in their footsteps someday. Charlton Heston's son beat him to the movie before he could crawl. Number 8, Cecil B. DeMille had a heart attack and finished the movie anyway. A camera needed checking at the top of the giant Rameses gate built for the Exodus, 107 feet up, roughly a 10-story building. DeMille didn't send someone up to look. He just climbed it himself at 73. And at the top, in the Egyptian heat, his heart gave out. Doctors told him to stay in bed for weeks, but he was back on set in about 2 days. The Egypt shoot had already stripped 20-plus pounds off him. Desert heat, dust storms, and a schedule brutal enough that the day's film got trucked 10 hours to Cairo, packed in dry ice, flown to Hollywood, and then flown back for his review 4 times a week. He was 73, shrinking, and running on a heart that had maybe 4 years left in it. So he cut a deal with his own doctor. A plan to keep directing while the crew quietly absorbed the heavy lifting. While the whole episode passed off as a bout of dysentery, so the studio wouldn't lose its nerve, all the while this whole episode would be passed off as a bout of dysentery, so the studio wouldn't lose its nerve. He had been warned that this would likely be his last picture. He finished it anyway. It premiered in November of 1956. He died in January 1959 at 77 of heart failure. Some directors leave a movie when production wraps, but Cecil B. DeMille, well, he left because there wasn't another one left to make. Hey, quick pause. If you're still with me, congrats. You've outlasted the frog plague, which is more than this movie can say. Hit like and subscribe so you catch the next one. And tell me in the comments, are you an Easter household or a Christmas household? If you said both, I'll allow it. I mean, the Ten Commandments isn't even an Easter story, but of course it plays every Easter. That's why we keep bringing it up. But anyways, we'll get back into the countdown because it's almost time to tell a little something to old Pharaoh. Let's get moving. Number 7, the country that built the movie couldn't show it. DeMille had a deal to film in Egypt, cleared all the way up the chain, sandstorms and all. But then the government that he had made that deal with was gone before a single frame was shot. And by the time the cameras were ready to roll in 1954, his team had to renegotiate the whole thing from scratch. It went shockingly well. The new leadership happened to be huge fans of an earlier DeMille picture, The Crusades, and especially of its star, Henry Wilcoxon, who just so happened to be the associate producer standing right there. The story goes that back in military school, they had admired Wilcoxon so much that one of them got saddled with his name as a nickname. The deal that came out of it was bigger than the original. 200 cavalry officers to ride as Pharaoh's chariot army, and Egyptian Air Force planes revving their engines across the desert to whip up sandstorms for the cameras. Real military hardware, borrowed to make a Bible movie, look better. And then the timing turned cruel. Days before the November 1956 premiere, the region erupted into conflict, and Egypt banned the Ten Commandments outright. The reporting at the time pointed to the film casting Egyptians as the villains. Thousands of Egyptians helped bring Moses' story to the screen, but most of them never got to watch it. Number 6, the composer who missed the movie won an Oscar anyway. Victor Young had scored 6 DeMille films over 12 years, the go-to guy who understood exactly how big these movies needed to sound. But when this one went into production, Young was sick and wrung out from a Broadway flop, and he had to pass. He recommended Elmer Bernstein, already attached for the dance and court sequences, and DeMille just handed him the whole score. Young died on November 10, 1956. 2 days after the film premiered in New York, and the timing only gets stranger. Across his whole career, Young had racked up 22 Oscar nominations without a single win. Still the record for most nominations before finally breaking through. And at the next year's ceremony, he broke through, posthumously. Not for this film, but for Around the World in 80 Days, which also beat the Ten Commandments for Best Picture that same night. Meanwhile, Bernstein's score, 2.5 hours of near Wagnerian opera for ancient Egypt, is now considered one of the great scores of its era, and it wasn't nominated at all. The man who turned the movie down won the Oscar, and the man who actually wrote its music got nothing. Number 5, Cecil B. DeMille helped 2 blacklisted artists come back. By reputation, Cecil B. DeMille was one of the strictest enforcers of Hollywood's loyalty politics in the Blacklist era. He led the 1950s push for a loyalty oath inside the Directors Guild, a fight that turned into an ugly public brawl, and one that he lost. If a studio needed someone to police political loyalty, DeMille's name sat near the top of the list. Then, for his last film, he quietly handed careers back to 2 men that same system had shoved aside. Edward G. Robinson had spent years and a small fortune trying to clear his name, and got knocked down into forgettable B pictures for his trouble. DeMille looked at the situation himself, decided that Robinson had been done an injustice, and gave him the role of Dathan. Robinson never forgot it. He said that he never met a man in Hollywood more opposed to communism than DeMille, or a fairer one, and that DeMille handed him back his self-respect. Elmer Bernstein, who took over the score after Victor Young fell ill, had been graylisted for old left-wing associations and was scraping by on movies like Catwomen of the Moon. Yeah. He put it simply, DeMille rescued him. The thinking around town was that if an arch-conservative like DeMille vouched for you, you couldn't be that much of a threat. A movie about an enslaved people escaping an oppressive regime, scored and partly acted by two men that the industry had tried to erase, brought back by the one director that everyone assumed would be the last to lift a finger for them. People, it turns out, are usually more complicated than their reputations. Number 4. Moses argued with himself for 48 years. The voice of God that stops Moses cold at the burning bush, that's Charlton Heston too. He's on both sides of the most important conversation in the whole movie, and most people watching never notice. It was his idea. During pre-production, Heston went to DeMille and pitched voicing God himself, his logic being that the moment that Moses learns who he really is would hit harder if the divine voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere inside him, not booming down from a cloud. DeMille said yes. So in this scene, Heston delivers Moses' lines, pauses, and then answers himself as God. His own voice slowed down, dropped low, and run through enough processing that you'd never pick it out as a guy standing in the frame. One actor, two registers, playing the entire emotional core of the film against himself. Nobody got a screen credit for the voice of God, and the altered audio did its job. Plenty of people have watched this movie a dozen Easters running and never realized that Moses and the Almighty are the same man. Hollywood's biggest special effect in this thing, it wasn't even the burning bush, it was the casting. Number 3, one of Metallica's greatest songs began with Moses. In 1983, three guys from Metallica, Cliff Burton, Lars Ulrich, and James Hetfield, sat down with a VHS copy of the Ten Commandments at Cliff's parents' house because they didn't own a VCR themselves. Grown men, a 4-hour biblical epic, one borrowed evening. That's the energy here. Lars had been obsessed with the movie since he was a kid, and he'll tell you straight, you can draw a line from it to creeping death. About 2 hours and 49 minutes in, the angel of death rolls off the moon as a green fog, creeping through Egyptian homes, dropping every firstborn that it touches. Cliff took one look and said it out loud. That's like creeping death. Hetfield told him to write it down, because that was the song. By 1984, it was on Ride the Lightning. The chorus was built straight out of the movie's most famous line, "So let it be written, so let it be done." It's now one of the most played songs in the band's entire live set. A line that DeMille screenwriters cooked up to sound like ancient Egyptian court ceremony, screamed back by tens of thousands of people a night on every tour. A movie about Moses became a thrash metal anthem. DeMille, I can guarantee he never saw that one coming. Number 2, the most famous shot in this movie is running backwards. The image that you picture the second anyone says the Ten Commandments is Heston, the staff, the green light, the walls of water standing up on either side. Well, that's running in reverse. That is the trick. Effects supervisor John P. Fulton dumped hundreds of thousands of gallons into a massive U-shaped tank, filmed the water crashing and churning, and then ran the footage backwards. Played forward, a collapse becomes a parting. All the foam and violence of water pouring in, that reads as the sea being torn open. 360,000 gallons, film going in, and then played coming out. Fulton won an Oscar for it.
The Ten Commandments. John P.
The same man who 2 decades earlier at Universal figured out how to make Claude Rains disappear in The Invisible Man. So the guy who made a man vanish also made an ocean split. He knew the fastest way to fake a miracle. Let the water do something real, and then reverse it. Number 1, this movie's merchandise is still outside of a courthouse near you. Now, there's a decent chance that a granite slab carved with the Ten Commandments is standing outside a courthouse or a state capitol somewhere near you right now. It looks ancient, permanent even, like it's been there since before anyone can remember, but it's merchandise from this movie. DeMille teamed up with a Minnesota judge and the Fraternal Order of Eagles to plant more than 100 of these granite tablets in public squares across the country. Timed to the 1956 release, with his stars sent out to cut the ribbons. Heston, the film's Moses, showed up at dedications personally. Brynner, the film's Pharaoh, turned up to unveil one in Milwaukee. The Texas monument that later reached the Supreme Court was carved with an image of the film's own prop tablets and installed in 1961. DeMille made a movie about a man carrying God's law down a mountain in stone. Then he had that same law carved into actual stone and parked on government lawns nationwide. A movie tie-in that outlived him by decades and ended up in front of the highest court in the country. And here's the kicker. 2 of these monuments reached the Supreme Court on the very same day. You had one in Texas and one in Kentucky, and they walked out with opposite rulings. One stayed and one had to go. A 1956 marketing stunt, still splitting the highest court in the land half a century later. There's probably one near you right now. It's been there your whole life. Somebody put it there to sell movie tickets. DeMille? He never believed in a soft sell. And there you have it, everyone. 15 weird facts about the 10 Commandments. Which one got you? Tell me in the comments. And then do something that Egypt's own cavalry will never do. Show this to whoever in your life watches this every Easter, whether or not they really watch or just kind of have it in the background. That conversation, it's going to get a lot more interesting. Until next time, so let it be written. This is Remember When.